This is the troubleshooting video for common problems people often run into while they are learning to knit. If you've made your way here because you've gotten stuck, I hope this video helps you find some answers. But it's good to remember that learning is a process and that perfection isn't the goal. Troubleshooting problems is part of the process of learning something new. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to work with your needles if the cord is coiled tightly and that's getting in your way. I'm also going to talk about how to avoid and what to do if your knitting is growing wider as you go row by row. You have more stitches than you cast on with. I'll talk about how to go back a couple stitches if you've made a mistake that you can see or you've split your yarn. I'll talk about what to do if you've dropped a stitch, and I'll also talk about how to get your work back on your needles if it has been pulled off. So if your knitting needles are if the coil of your knitting needles is a little tight and it's getting in your way or kind of pulling your needles while you're trying to knit, you can grab a hair dryer and hold it about an inch or so away from the cord and hold your cord nice and straight like that, or just hang one needle in front of the hair dryer and bring the heat up and down the length of the cord to warm it up, and then pull it straight. And that will help the plastic to relax, and you'll have a nice open, looser coil like this, which will make it easier to work with the needles. If you notice that your knitting is growing wider as you go, so you've cast on, and my sample has 10 stitches, but I noticed that one end of my work starts to get wider, and now I have 11 and then 12 stitches. It grows every time. This is a really common problem that people encounter when they're learning, because this working yarn, in order to knit your next row, has to be at the back of the work like this. But it's easy to pull it to the back of the work accidentally by going over the needle like that. That brings your old stitch up to the front of the work and makes it look like you've got two stitches here, but actually this is your old stitch. This is both legs of your old stitch, and they often get knit into. So instead of one stitch, you now are knitting as if you had two stitches here, and that makes your work start to grow wider. So to avoid that, you just bring your yarn underneath this needle in order to get to your next row. Sometimes this first stitch can look a little bit long like that, but actually as you start knitting, that evens out into the work. So try not to focus on it too much, and just trust that it's going to get kind of incorporated into the work. A lot of times people see that first stitch looking long and they try to fix it by bringing the yarn over the top and then knitting both stitches, and that's how the work grows wider. So if you are working along happily and you're knitting and you need to go back a stitch because you have accidentally split your yarn, so instead of knitting into the stitch, you accidentally split the yarn and knit into the length of yarn itself. This is a common problem. The beam yarn is actually really good about it, but other yarns that you might get started working with, it's more common to split them as you go. So to go back a stitch, you're actually going to notice that your old stitch is right below your new stitch like that. You're going to take the tip of your left needle and pass it into the stitch on the row below, catching it like that as if you hadn't taken it off the needle yet, and just slip the new stitch off of the right needle and just pull the yarn so that you undo one stitch. So I'll do that again, putting my left needle into the stitch, the row below, just slide off the new stitch and reincorporate the working yarn into your right hand. That's how to undo a couple of stitches to go back on your work. When the yarn is on your left needle, you're wanting to make sure that it's positioned with the leg on the front of the stitch on closer to you. Sometimes when you put the stitch back on this needle, you can just see that it's reversed. So you'll just want it to be aligned with all of the other stitches on the needle. It's hard to see that in a video, but you'll know it when you feel it. If you have dropped a stitch, so this happens a lot. The stitch has come off your needles like that, and it's just hanging loose, and it hasn't unraveled at all. Just pick it right back up and pop it on your needle and knit it as normal. Harder than that to deal with, but not impossible, is if your stitch fell off the needle and then a row or even 2 rows of yarn got pulled out. So this stitch is now hanging out down here, a row down, and I have like a bar of yarn passing between the 2 needles. I can still work with this by catching the hanging stitch into my right needle like that. And then I'm actually going to lay the bar over the tip of my needle like that. And then I'm going to use the left hand needle to scoop that dropped stitch over the bar. So it pulled it through and made it look just like the rest of the stitches. And now I'm going to put that drop stitch back onto my left needle and just knit it normally. If your knitting gets pulled off of your needles like that, you can have, and your stitches there look pretty defined, you can just slide your needle right back into however many stitches have dropped off your needle. That works in both directions. Sometimes the knitting falls off of our needles, or we've dropped more stitches than we're comfortable picking up, and we just need to go back a row. This is called frogging in knitting because you rip it. It's like a knitting joke. You might need to pull all the way back a couple of rows. Stop when you reach the end of a row. And just go ahead and when you have a nice clean row, pick up the stitches like that. My very last stitch here hasn't fallen out, so I will just put it all right back on the needle and get started with the next row and not really sweat it if I've had to unravel one row. So those are the most common issues that people often run into when they are learning to knit. And if you have more troubles than that, feel free to email us and we can try to help you out.